Yeah, we just go through our process. I think our process is one that I think because of our familiarity with so many people in our organization, it's a well-oiled machine, and we go through that process. And that process, encompasses a lot of things. It starts out last May, and our scouts are out on the road, and oftentimes I say last May, but they've been on these guys for 3, 4. Sometimes we're seeing now the 6-year player, still the remnants of COVID, and so you're getting players who have been here longer with NIL. Later in the process, we bring our coaching staff, our medical and performance staff. They're very involved. Our R&D staff, player engagement, and Matt, we have a process where we work through this, and real proud of that because, and to me, I think I've said this to you guys often, I think it's the best representation of our organization coming together as anything, because it really is a collective process, and ultimately decisions have to be made, but we really have heard everyone. Used a word, consensus. Consensus is something we look for. When we have consensus throughout our organization and alignment, we do really, really well in the draft. We have our R&D guys look at that as they look at so many things, and so consensus is a big part of it, and I think it's a big part of the successes we've had. And when we've maybe tailed off from not having consensus is maybe when we've made some of our things we wish we could have back. So it's something we strive for.
When you talk about R&D, do they conduct polls within the organization?
They do a lot of things. I mean, they look at every facet of the game. Our coaches, Kyle does a great job of allowing them in meetings. I mean, you guys have heard Chris Kasarik, and what's he do? He gets squatted over and get the what off, and so we have a GTFO grade, and that was born out of them just listening to Chris Kasarik, and so they take not just abstract but applicable things that they know that we covet, our coaches covet, we covet in our schemes, and they study it from a research and development. But then, yes, Matt, they look at our past successes, our past failures, and they look at the reason behind it. They look at trends or patterns with certain position groups, what goes in from hand size or 10 time or, to things that tend to be more about intangibles. So they're very thorough. Matt Plonsky does a tremendous job leading that group, and started when I got here. It was Quasey. Quasey did a tremendous job, and I think Matt Plonsky's even taken it to another level along with his group. So really proud of the work they do.
When you're looking at defensive ends, John, what else besides the GTFO grade? what are the other top 2 or 3 traits that you want to see in a defensive end?
Yeah, so you hear us talk a lot about setting edges. You got to have the ability to set a firm edge. When we're playing that wide 9 technique, setting an edge, there's space, and so you have to be able to take that space away that is initially there, and so that's something we covet. And then obviously you take a look at can they put pressure, much like a wide receiver who can put pressure on a corner by coming at him first and foremost and threatening him with power and or speed. Very similar with an edge player is that they can threaten, and that gets a tackle or any player on their heels, and then their repertoire that Chris and his group does such a great job with, coming up with a plan for each player that's specific to their game and then specific to their opponent. So we look at all those things, and we have a really good idea of what we're looking for.
Kind of a follow-up to that on the defensive line. No secret what your needs there, but when you're trying to evaluate, production versus measurables,
Mm-hmm.
and all the athletic abilities,
Yeah.
how do you kind of mesh that? It seems like this year's class, there's guys who may be heavy on production, not so much on measurables, and vice versa.
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's a good mix of that. And there's no absolute as to what exactly the right formula, because it takes both. You want to see skills that translate to what we do, but you also want to see that they've done it at a high level, or at least that there's evidence that they can do it. We believe if put in our system that they can translate. I think you generally you end up struggling though when when you project too much, because these guys have had ample time, and there's always circumstances and context that you take into account as to maybe why this guy's so talented but he's never had the production. At some point the production doesn't lie. So it's a good mix of those things, and I think the process kind of takes care of that.
With the tail end of COVID and a lot of these guys with NIL having to kind of manage themselves from a business perspective, are you seeing kind of more maturity from this class and maybe the last class in the past?
Well, you hope it's maturity. I can't say that all the time. I think the one thing, Tracy, if you're looking at it, I always like looking at things optimistically. And, I do think, I've talked to a number of college coaches, maybe one advantage, if you're looking, you can say, you know what, NIL, this is awful for football. And I think one positive, we get to see how guys respond to having some resources, and can they handle that? Are they, and then there's an added bonus that, typically I think we've all experienced. You got to make some mistakes with finances and things of those natures, the pressures, the inherent pressures. And so we get to see a couple years in, how do they respond to having some money? Some guys can't handle it. Some guys handle it extremely well. And so I do think, if you're looking at it from an optimistic standpoint, that there is some positive things that can come of that.
Last year, everybody you drafted except for Renardo Green had transferred to another school, and it turned out that you were able to see how these guys could adjust to a new system, and maybe that helped. Are you seeing a ton more guys that in the draft this year that are the same thing? Do you think it'll happen again?
There aren't many who haven't. I tell the story often that when I came here in 17 in our first draft meetings, and the ones I had done with the Broncos before, I used to stop the meeting and say, hold on, why did he transfer? What's wrong with him? Let's look deeper into this. And now it's the rarity when a guy, hey, this guy's been at one school for 5 years, and like, what's wrong with him? Nothing's wrong with him. So there is a different dynamic. The one thing you can't let, like your old school views, like, man, this guy's transferred everywhere he's been. That's kind of the way of the world right now. And I think you look into the reasons why, because that might tell you part of the story and the makeup as to who this kid is. And then I think at other times you appreciate this guy could have transferred. He had a lot of smaller school guys that had a lot of opportunity, but they stayed loyal to that school. Or sometimes that makes you think, man, was he afraid of playing at a higher? So there's so many different ways you can go down it, but you try to identify, okay, and then I think you certainly don't penalize them for that, because then you'd be penalizing most of the players in this draft.
John, the way the roster's set up, you probably need to find multiple starters, especially on defense. Last year was clearly a good example of that, but why do you believe that you can repeat that same sequence?
I'd tell you that I think generally people probably create narratives that fit to their needs for how this draft plays out. I don't think we do. I do think the hallmark of this draft, I was talking with some of our guys before I came down, I like the depth of this draft. I like that there's a lot of quality starters throughout this draft, and I think it runs deep into day 2 and even into day 3. I think with our process and knowing what we like and knowing that really well, who we are and who we want to be, I think there's a lot of starters in this draft. You could argue that maybe the high end in the front isn't as deep as it might have been in other years, but I think the quality depth that runs deep into this draft is a strength of this draft. And, that's exciting for where we're at.
Adam Schefter reported yesterday that you've been in contact with teams about potentially trading down. Is that true? Is that something you'd be interested in?
Yeah, I had a good friend call me a couple weeks ago and said, hey, we're in the top 6, and I'm hearing you're calling everyone in the top 6, and you haven't called me. And I said to that person, I've known you for 30 years. You think if you're in the top 6 and I was truly doing that, I would have called you? Okay. So, but I think generally, Grant, this time of year, you're kind of calling just because a draft breaks out and you never know what's going to happen. You want to have done your work so that hey, if we do want to go back, there's this opportunity. So you do kind of just go down the line and said, hey, not sure what we're going to do. If our guys are there, we'll probably stay put. But would you have an appetite to come up? That's good to know. So.
Do you have a guy in mind for 11, like right now?
Oh, we've got a few guys. Yeah.
John, with the uncertainty of like what the first 10 picks are, do you see that this is more uncertain this year than it has been historically, just because of what teams which direction they may go?
I think when you're drafting 32, there's even more. So I think each step that you're back further, there's more variables that are involved there. So I think it's just you do your work, you grade every player, you have a lot of conversations at the highest level, Kyle and myself, Jed even, as to here's what we want to come out of this draft with, our coordinators, and then you take it to the whole group. And we rely a lot on our scouts. Tomorrow we'll get in there and our scouts will we call it table talk. They stand on the table and they say, this is the 3 guys I'm most convicted about in this draft at any kind of for the value. And so it never stops. It will go right down to the pick. I mean, we'll have a pretty good idea. We'll have it ranked as to, okay, if this guy's here, we're going here. If this guy's not here, we're going here. Or, it makes it really fun. And you got to think on your feet. And I really enjoy it. It's one of the things I enjoy most about this job.
Do you feel like it's a new era where you see more coaches and GMs communicating and collaborating more? It seems like kind of old school. There were GMs that made the decision and didn't matter what the coach wanted. Do you feel like it's an evolution?
I don't know. I think it's what we've always done, and I like it. I always tell our scouts, I always tell our coaches, I was a byproduct. I ended up having a decent career and ended up being able to, play 15 years. But for the first 2 years, I struggled to get on the field. And I didn't know at the time, and I take some full accountability for, not being good enough at that time. But I was thinking to myself, I left a baseball opportunity to go to the worst organization in football, and I can't get on the field. What's wrong with me? and it turns out, I find out about 5 years in that the defensive coordinator, who's a good man and a really good coach, Floyd Peters, he didn't want me. The head coach, Sam Weish, wanted me. And so I felt that, and I could do everything, and what I thought was perfect, other people thought was perfect. Nobody's perfect, but I could do my assignment, hit it, and he would find fault. And Floyd and I later had a really good discussion, and he goes, it's not that I'm okay if there's 3 players, and I didn't get the guy I wanted, but I was good with all 3. I didn't want you. I'm fine saying that, and I screwed up. Floyd was a man about it, but so that always has stuck with me. You don't have to take the exact player that if you have a clump of guys that coaches are interested, but probably not a good idea to take a player that coaches don't want, because that can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. That's always stuck with me.
John, you've been doing this a number of years now, and there's been some people who say there's going to be a lot of trades this year.
Mhm.
Do you get a feeling for something like that at this point in relation to the draft, or is it just random year to year?
What I believe, I feel like there's a lot of people trying to go that way, probably because what I talked about, the quality of starters that run deep into this draft. And generally when everyone wants to do the same thing, there's not as much opportunity. So I think early in the draft, that's what I feel. A lot of people are going to end up staying put because everyone's trying to do the same thing. I think every time we say that, somebody throws a wrench in it, and then it's kind of a free-for-all. So John Madden, at Fox, one of the things they used to say, you do all this pre-produced stuff, and Madden used to, what happens when a game breaks out, and I think it's the same thing with the draft. You can have all the plans in the world, but a draft is going to break out. A bunch of different things are going to happen, and we'll see what happens. But my inclination is, at least in the first round, I think a lot of people are probably going to try, but when everyone's trying to do the same thing, there's not much opportunity to do so.
John, how does the depth at certain positions impact what you do in round 1? Maybe if you get a guy, filling on day 2 at a certain position, maybe not so.
Right. I think the most important thing, I think anybody, and yes, there's certain teams that don't draft to need, and that's a core philosophy of theirs, that they're not going to let need ever enter the. I think they believe that, but they're not always doing that. You have to address your roster at some point, but I do know that especially in the first round, we have a relatively high pick. You can't go wrong picking a quality player, and if that isn't like a glaring need on your team, that's all right, because this guy, this player is going to end up playing for you and contributing and hopefully moving the needle. And so I think you have to, it's a fine balance between drafting towards need, especially when you're drafting up high. I think you got to be cognizant that you can't go wrong taking really good quality players.
John,
Assuming that you guys kind of go the defensive route throughout the draft, which I'm sure that's on your mind when you go into this draft, knowing that your defense coming into next season may be on the younger side, how much more comfortable does it make you to know great track record on the defense
Yeah, it
side.
gives a lot of comfort. Robert's a really good football coach, and I think has a lot more experience, now than when we last left him. And so it's been really fun being in the draft meetings, and Robert, and also hearing how Robert's evolved. It's not the same as when he left, and that's what good coaches do. They constantly evolve, and hearing what he wants in certain positions and articulating it. It's very clear with Robert, and that's always a good thing for someone like me and our scouts and our front office is, we really try as an organization to make people be able to verbalize very clearly what they're looking for at each position. And Robert and his staff, they're very clear with what they want, with what they need, with what they aspire to be, and that's very helpful.
Is Trent Williams here for OTAs? You talked to him recently about his mindset and his ankle.
Yeah, Trent is here, and I don't want to go down that road of saying who's here, who's not. It's a voluntary time. I can tell you we're really thrilled. Almost our entire team's here, almost every player, and we're excited about that. I think we need that. We need that togetherness. We need that shared sacrifice. Having said that, we got a lot of great players and great people that have intrinsic motivation, and whether they're here or not, they're going to be working, and we trust that, we believe in that. So, but it's always nice to have you guys here, and Trent's doing really well.
John, when you drafted Brock a couple years ago, could you ever imagine going from last pick to now, working on extension as the face of your franchise and the quarterback and going down for the next 10 plus years?
Oh, I knew it. I mean, we wanted him early, and we just said, let's just wait to the end and drag this thing on a little. No, I wish we did know that we liked the player, and I've told you the people, there's a lot of people who deserve a lot of credit for those successes. One no longer working with us, Brian Greasy, was very involved with that. Steve Slowick, I've talked about him numerous times, but there's a great example of the process working. A guy we had kind of later, and that's like kind of during the last couple of weeks, our scouts, once they're in town, and our coaches, they've been working together, but they work together on the back end of the draft, and they get very excited and motivated. And Brock happened much earlier than the last couple weeks, but they spent a lot of time. It was they zooming and really got to a great feel, and then they bring it up to we had seen Brock, but they come with the information they're armed with, and you can feel the conviction that they have, and so then you bring it to the entire room, and then Kyle and I focus on it, and we knew we wanted to add Brock, and I finally had the courage to ask him, hey, would you have come to us as a free agent? And he kind of plays with me on that one. So I still don't know. I'm glad we didn't take it to chance, and we made him the last pick of the draft, and it's served us well.
What does it signal to you, John, that Brock is here, that all the contract stuff that's still ongoing?
Just that's Brock. He's a pro, and he's Brock's got he's a very clear-minded and not going to let other people influence like what he should be doing, and that's one thing everybody I think respects about Brock. He's done a lot for this organization, and we're grateful for him, and looking forward to having him as our quarterback for a long time.
Would you say that you guys have made progress on the contract talks since the last time we talked to you at the owners meeting?
I think there's been some substantive talks that have this thing going in a good direction, and I'll leave it at that. But yeah.
John, he is your starting quarterback, and some players have insight into personnel, some don't. Does a guy like Brock want to take a look at some tight ends or some receivers? Does he have opinions about these guys?
It's usually about year 6 or 7. He's not now yet, but I think Brock. He does have opinions. That generally comes more with he and Kyle when they're probably on the pro players. He hasn't got into the college stuff. I know he's very high on Iowa State guys, and there's a few good ones this year. They do a great job. What a program! I mean, they just find a bunch of 3 stars. They don't really go after and Matt Campbell and those guys do a tremendous job. So, you know what you get when you get an Iowa State player. Brock has shown us that, and there's some other guys in this draft that kind of are representative of that.
Do you also feel that things are headed in a good direction with George, and do you expect him to be here for the 11-on-11 OTA portion of the offseason?
We'll see on that. You know, these things are voluntary right now, but you know, again, with that, we've had good communication, good talks, and we'll see where that goes.
John, this is the last one.
There was a story in which Devontae Adams said he wasn't on the winning team.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was that, I mean, were there other guys, like notable names where you at least like say, hey, we'll have to take our, you know, might as well like take our shot and be realistic about where we are financially and just see what happens?
Yeah. Corey made me aware of that quote, and I saw the quote, and it said his agent had told him that. That wasn't me. I've always had a great deal of respect for Devontae. That didn't line up. He's on a division rival. We're going to have our work cut out covering him and playing against him. He's a really good player. So if there was any disrespect taken, you know, none was intended. I'm sure. Kyle didn't talk to agents. Yeah.
Tradition, you tell us how many draftable players you have and how many first round grades. What are those numbers?
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I started doing this, and my buddy up north, John Schneider, I used to say, like, we made 661 former school visits, and John would say, I'm really excited with Pete Carroll. They'd sit up there. We made 662 school visits, and he'd always point. And I finally, it took me, I'm a little slower. It took me 2 years to see he was playing with me. But we, you know, so this year we've got about 20 first-round grades compared to 23 and 15 the last couple of years. You know, we have 200 players considered draftable. It's up from 170. So I do think that speaks to the depth of this draft. Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.